In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a great chat with Beate Kubitz, a transport consultant and a future mobility researcher in the UK. This podcast episode is another audio from the YouTube series that I've been doing, catching up with previous podcast guests during the pandemic. We recorded this chat in May of 2020, but I'm definitely going to get Beate back on the podcast to give us an update down the track and also to have a smart community chat. In this episode, Beate tells us about her passion for transport and the way it impacts our lives, plus her interest in the innovations happening in the mobility space. She then tells us about the cargo bike delivery service that came about out of a desire to meet demand for deliveries in the early days of the pandemic lockdown in her small town in the UK. We talk about the challenges of regular delivery models, such as vehicle access down very narrow lanes, and how the cargo bike idea was initially a crisis response to make sure that people in the local community were able to access food during the lockdown, but has now sparked long-term possibilities in terms of future mobility behaviour change and reducing reliance on private vehicle use. We discuss the volunteer model they have set up and the way that it works with local shops, as well as the changes to how we shop long-term and the new business models that will be required in the future for grocers and shops and potentially for cargo bike delivery services too. Beate then tells us about the data she's been keeping on the delivery service and the impact it's made not only on reducing emissions compared to a delivery van, but also the journeys people haven't made in their cars to get groceries. We finish up talking a little bit about Beate's normal business and how that's changed during COVID, but we'll definitely have this follow-up conversation to dive a bit more deeply into that. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Beate. How are you today?
Hi Zoe, I'm great today. It's a lovely sunny morning in Todmorden in between Manchester and Leeds in the UK.
Excellent. It's so great to speak with you. And we were meaning to do a Smart Community Podcast episode a while ago now when I was racing around finding guests for Mobility March, but we didn't end up getting there. But I have been following you on LinkedIn and we will do an episode for the podcast, which, we talk about smart communities and mobility and all those things. But I wanted to get you on today because you've been doing some different things and obviously things have changed so much, from the beginning of the crisis to now as well. So I'm just really keen to hand over to you and just tell us, first of all, tell us who you are, and you've already told us where you are, and just tell us what you normally did, and then that's a lot of questions. We'll start with that.
Okay, so I'm a transport consultant, a researcher, and I write quite a lot of thought pieces about the way that transport's developing, new mobility and future, and the way that innovation could affect our lives. I'm really interested in mobility as a service. I'm really interested in finding ways of helping people transition away from having a personal car that they have to own on towards greener technologies and more shared technologies. So I do quite a lot of work in bike share. I've just finished evaluating an electric vehicle and electric cargo bike project in Manchester run by Manchester City Council and the two universities. I'm working on mobility hubs for Calderdale Council. Just finished a piece about mobility as a service in adult social care in Cambridgeshire. So all sorts of kind of new mobility type things. But when the crisis really became apparent, a little bit before the official lockdown in the UK, when people were saying stay at home if you have cold symptoms of any kind, I got a cold. So I immediately stayed at home with my housemates and my partner, and we cast our eyes around, and actually there were already 5 families within, 500 metres of my house who were all sheltering because of either temporary things like having some respiratory symptoms or because of longer term issues like vulnerabilities from treatments and immune problems. So I thought immediately, what is the implication of this? It's delivery. The implication of this is that we're going to get a lot more vans and supermarket delivery vehicles up and down our lanes, which are not particularly built for. Even the Mercedes Sprinter is a bit large to go up and down our lane. And so my immediate thought was, well, I wonder if we can do this differently. This is Todmorden. We are a well known for our innovative spirit, and I thought, well, this is the only time we've probably got an opportunity to see whether an electric cargo bike could actually meet the demand for deliveries. And so, entirely coordinating remotely for 2 weeks, which was a little bit tricky, I obtained from Manchester Bike Hire, bless them, an electric cargo bike. It's a Reese & Miller Paxter 80 for anyone who's interested in the technical details of cargo bikes. And she's called Bertha, and she arrived, I think, on the 24th of March. And a couple of friends kind of had to go to Manchester anyway as part of their work. So they brought her back for me, put her in the yard, we cleaned her down, and she immediately went into duties working for, first of all, just getting stuff for neighbours. Some of my friends don't drive, don't have vehicles, and the problem with sharing vehicles is insurance. So although, technically people can drive, then the whole kind of like using each other's cars in the UK is a bit of an issue. So bike doesn't have these issues. And so friends of ours who weren't in Chelsea could just kind of borrow her, go and do a shop or whatever. And whilst that was happening, I was putting out feelers into the local community to find out which shops really found that they were needing deliveries. We have a market, a Lindor covered market, which has 10 or maybe slightly more stalls. And I mean, at the time as well, right at that beginning, people were panicking and trying to get online orders from supermarkets, and there were absolutely no slots. And my next door neighbour has to shelter, and she was really struggling to find ways to feed her family. And they have that one of their children is very ill, so she really didn't want to put him in any kind of danger. So I was thinking that there must be shops out there who could deliver food. So I used Facebook and community things and just sent out messages. And eventually someone from Todmorden Market, which is, you have to understand, not the world's most online kind of venue. So yes, Todmorden Market has gone, a number of the stallholders, all the provisions stallholders have gone onto this website called Shop Happy, which will collate all the orders. And so I've been organising the deliveries for those using the cargo bike, which is Wednesday to Saturday, and there's been around about 10 orders a day from Todmorden Market. Then our local health food shop, Todd Almighty, has been using the service, and that was quite different because she was very worried that people would abuse it. And actually, once I said, well, if you want to charge and give me the money for it, then that's fine. So that's a charged deliveries because that suited her. And she felt better about charging because she would really like the cargo bike to continue after the end of this crisis as we reach a new normal. And then we also do bits and bobs for other shops, like there's a cheese shop that does deliveries a couple of times a week. And then on Saturday mornings, the Todmorden Food Bank, which is quite a different sort of around. One of the things that I found was you quickly understand that different sorts of shopping weighs differently and loads differently, and you've got to work out. So the Todd Almighty, everything is boxed in veg boxes, which loads completely differently from the market food, which comes in bags. And so I've obtained some of the Euro crates that supermarkets use, and we can stack 6 of those into the bay at the front of the cargo bike. Food bank orders they're not orders, they are gifts, donations. And what I found is that the food that's donated is non-perishable, and it's a lot heavier. So we can do fewer of those actual bags per set of deliveries, which was a bit of a very real kind of reflection on the different sorts of food that people can have. If you're paying for your food, you're buying fresh stuff, which is light and airy and not as dense. And if you're not paying for it, you seem to be getting things that maybe aren't as fresh and full of vitamins. And that's something that I've been really worrying about over the last couple of weeks. So those are our kind of current clients at the moment. We've also been lent a bike by Calderdale Council, which is our local borough council, who've had some electric electric tourist hire bikes. And one of those was a cargo bike. So in our neighbouring town, which is 5 miles down the valley, we've installed that bike and we've started to do deliveries for one of the local shops there. So we're sort of spreading out because it's a long, thin valley and there are lots of little sort of towns and villages along the length of it. And with the cargo bikes, you're really kind of remaining within a certain orbit of each centre. I mean, saying centre that makes them sound like a kind of thriving metropolis. You know, we're a market. Each centre is a sort of market and a nice collection of shops. And we have some really nice shops, but it's not vast. And I think really interesting things have happened. I realised that, you know, we've got different rounds sort of developing within the area. Todmorden about 10,000 people, and it's sort of arranged along 3 valleys, which meet at the centre. So you kind of like develop these rounds. And although we have some really rural areas then that are kind of up the hills, most of our deliveries are actually along the 3 sort of spurs that radiate out from the centre. So sometimes we end up with a kind of quite a long trip, so 25 miles in a day maybe. And some days it's just 10 because no one on the tops has ordered. And that it's quite interesting. Again, you know, you've got a slightly different demographic, the denser houses in the centre versus the kind of like houses on the hills, and the rate at which people buy shopping. It's absolutely fascinating, and things I've never thought of in my life. But what's really important to me was the kind of long-term issue and thinking about what's going to happen as we come out of this, because we can see an economic crisis coming down the tubes. I mean, there are jobs being lost already. Companies are talking about going straight from furlough to redundancies, things like that. And I think that in a place like Todmorden, which is very, very semi-rural, we have quite high rates of car ownership. And cars are expensive. It's not just the fuel and it's the maintenance, and it's the where you keep them, and also repayments. I think that's the other crisis that's potentially coming down coming fast at us from the future is that crisis in loan repayments, as people find that their economic circumstances are reduced. So one of the really nice things I've been talking to people about as I've been delivering, and it's not just me delivering, it's a number of different cyclists around the valley who are all pretty keen on a bit of extra exercise. But one of the things I've been talking to people about is this going to help you know that you don't need a car? So, you know, if you can order your shopping, and it can be local shopping, it doesn't have to be supermarket shopping, then could you maybe not have 2 cars, maybe not even have 1 car? I think the really interesting thing is seeing a lot more people out walking in the town and thinking, just feeling that, you know, there's a slightly different attitude to the way that we travel around developing. So, yeah, so there was a kind of crisis response, trying to make sure that people got fed, which we're doing, which has been amazing. And then there's been this sort of long-term, can we reduce the number of cars? Can we reduce the need to rely on cars? Because I think one of the things that we worry about is people being trapped into car ownership and it really costing them a disproportionate amount of their income. And that could only get worse, I think, in the future if we have a bit of an economic crash. A bit of an economic crash, that's one of those oxymorons, a severe economic event. So yeah, so that's what we've been doing. We've been calling it Cargo Dale because we live in Calderdale and it's a cargo bike. and it's been one of those strangely easy to do things. I mean, obviously we haven't kind of created a business model properly for it. It's not really funded. I've just been paying for it, paying for the hire of it, and everyone's volunteering because it's something they want to do when there isn't a great deal else to do at the moment, to be honest. But it's interesting, and we've got a lot of data out of it. So, you know, we have a tracker on it, so we know what the daily mileage is. We know what CO2 emissions avoided are for it. We know how many deliveries we've done. We know all the postcodes that we've been to. So yeah, it's kind of really interesting from the data point of view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking a lot about data lately. Well, I'm doing a master's of data science, so you'd think that I would be. But yeah, I was thinking about some of these, you know, we talk about data in tracking and tracing and all those type of things, but then actually measuring and monitoring these other impacts, these other things that are happening because of the crisis. Really interested in looking at that, and then the ongoing behaviour change that maybe we can drive through no pun intended, through, showing that this is possible, because it had to be possible, right? People had to get fed. So we had to find a solution. Whereas we could, we continue that moving on when we do go back to something that's, I don't think it will be normal, what is normal these days, but something that go back to what it was, or and that we can move more freely, or it'll be really interesting. So thanks so much for sharing. I really enjoyed listening to your story, and you're obviously still going. Like, do you see an end in sight yet, or is it still really, really uncertain there as well?
So I mean, I think we've reached a kind of plateau in Todmorden. I'd say we're doing about between 50 and 80 deliveries a week at the moment, and I think the next challenge is to work out what the new normal is. And for people, as we come out of lockdown, which is not yet, in the UK, we've not yet got a date for that definitively, how people are going to want to shop, because I don't know about where you are, but at the moment, the way that we shop is very distant. So everyone is 2 meters apart in queues. There are queues to go into supermarkets. You move around in a single direction. And so shopping has become a lot more slow and a lot more drawn out. And I was reading a supermarket report saying that they were seeing a move back to not necessarily a weekend shop, but a once a week shop as a kind of average purchase, that people would go and buy things once a week rather than what we had before, which was just constantly topping up, because you've introduced this sort of friction into the system so that shopping is now a much slower activity. So as we move to the new normal, I don't think some shops are never going to be able to go back to their old operating method because they're too small. You can't achieve that 2 meter distance. So I think we're going to see people looking at new business models for their small shops, maybe a lot more delivery for larger shops. So in terms of like maybe developing a business model for Cargo Dale, I think that's kind of quite potentially viable. That how it will pan out over time, whether people sort of like go, yeah, we can go shopping again, and all go shopping, and then we get a second wave of the virus, and then everyone kind of comes back and goes, right, okay, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Yeah. I really don't know exactly how the future will kind of play out, but I suspect there will still be a lot more delivery going on, even in an area like Todmorden, than there was previously. And it would be really cool to be doing that, or, as a or facilitating making that happen as a proper business, because let's face it, there are going to be people needing jobs. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, so I really am passionate about regional areas and, using smarts and not necessarily super fancy technology or anything like that, but, using new ways of thinking and working and whatever in regional areas, because they can benefit the most a lot of the time. Because, we've, like you said, people have access to certain things, right? They did have access and now they don't have access, and it's even more prominent, I feel, in regional areas where there wasn't an option to just pop down to the corner store potentially or whatever, that they had to just stay home, and then you don't have that density necessarily. So how do you, and we talk a lot about walking and cycling, but that's when you're, however many kilometres out. But if you can get something delivered and in a sustainable way, can that actually work? And I think, people are very worried, and particularly planners are worried about the delivery model of, then we're not going to restaurants, we're not going to cafes and, that social fabric. But I think there's definitely a balance, and there's a model though that, I don't particularly enjoy grocery shopping at the best of times. So I would rather save that time and then spend it, at a restaurant or whatever at a different time after I've got my delivery. So I think there's this kind of, going out for those things that you really enjoy and then savoring those, and then actually, saving your time with and creating a different business model where delivery. Delivery is not a new thing, right? But actually we can do it in different ways that can be more sustainable.
I think, this is my own experience of sort of behaviour change and delivery, is that I have a veg box. I've had a veg box for more than a couple of years now, just because I found that my life was too varied to go do that regular shop. So the basics come in the veg box, and then I kind of top up shop. And I kind of see a lot of more people moving to that, even just talking to people who I'm delivering for. So my next door neighbour now has a veg box, and she says, but that means the basics are covered. So if she can then sort of try and find other sources for additional things. And I think maybe that's going to kind of become a new normal for a lot more people, that the basics arrive, but then you can have a discretionary top up of other things. So that's kind of quite interesting. And the fact is that people aren't going to go back once, people have made that, learnt to shop in a different way. Those sorts of behaviour changes stick. That we've been doing them for 6 weeks at least. I've lost track of time, frankly. Yeah. A long time, ages, possibly 3. Who knows? But we've been doing these things, and I think we always say that if everyone worked from home 1 day a week, that's 20% reduction in traffic. I think it's the same kind of metrics. If a fifth of people continue to carry on with this behaviour, then it'll have a massive impact. One of the things that's really interested me about the cargo bike and delivery is reflecting on all of those people who mostly would have driven into the town centre to go and shop. So I've collected, my mileage and CO2 emissions avoided, but actually I suspect that would be a much bigger figure if you counted the journeys into Todmorden that people have avoided making, because they're obviously making a one-off there and back again type journey in a car. And we have a lot of SUVs in the valley. It's kind of like, people think that they need a four-wheel drive, but it is that kind of a place where that ruggedy marketing has really taken hold in people's imaginations. So I've always wondered about what the traffic implications for a move from shopping to delivery would be, and I feel that I'm really coming down on the positive side, that actually delivery reduces traffic, particularly if it's in a cargo bike. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I think you need consolidation though, and that's the kind of thing that we're starting to achieve in Todmorden. We've used this kind of town-based website called Shop Happy. So each retailer loads their stock onto it, and it'll consolidate all of the orders. You can have cheese from Mrs. Crumbly Cheese, and veg from the veg stand, and sweets and pies and whatever from the market, and it creates this kind of like shopping basket that's more diverse. And it also means that at the moment we're doing free delivery, but it means that if we did move to charge delivery, it would just be one delivery fee for all your shopping from the centre of Todmorden. And that's kind of quite a nice thing and an ability to have, but it does kind of emphasise that it's not the same as the Amazon Prime, where you can have one shopping basket and 3 different vans turn up. It's kind of the inverse model.
And I think what it also does is it shows people what is possible. And so, you're delivering on a cargo bike, and maybe they think, okay, well, when they can, obviously, maybe I could ride my bike into the centre to have a coffee or whatever. And so, the delivery part, because I think there's a lot of when you drive your carts because it's heavy and whatever, whereas you can walk into the centre and have a coffee and walk home or whatever because the delivery side is taken care of.
Oh, totally. And I think that whilst the streets are much quieter, the roads are much quieter, there's also just a lot more people walking and cycling around as well, which is brilliant. It's been really pleasing to see people getting out, which helped that we've had amazing weather for most of lockdown, which you kind of think, what are we doing lockdown in this situation? But that means that there are also a load of willing volunteers to ride the cargo because they all want to get out in the nice weather. So we are seeing different patterns establish themselves of people walking. Delivery obviously emphasises that kind of ability to have the heavy stuff taken by someone else, which is brilliant. And also the other thing, I constantly have oh my God, are you managing up all of the hills? And the thing that I have found brilliant about the cargo bike is that we have some absolutely stonking hills in Calderdale, and it gets up them no problems. And the other thing that we have are very narrow lanes. We have unmade roads which are quite bumpy, and you can't deliver to them in a van. Basically, you have to get out and walk and leave your van blocking the main road, whereas the cargo bike copes with all of that admirably. So it kind of feels like a really good vehicle for the environment, and surprisingly so. I don't think that anyone really kind of realised, including myself, that it would be so perfect for so many of our kind of narrow streets, unmade streets, ginnels we have between, which are kind of like they're like streets, they're like little tiny lanes between the backs of houses, so that the cargo bike would be down there. So yeah, it's great. It's been more appropriate than I ever imagined.
So interesting. I'm thinking about, I mean, in Australia, obviously we have this tyranny of distance, but for like a hub or just say a regional town, like it can be quite large, you know, in space, and you have people in different areas. And so it could be a hybrid model where, you know, some will go and sometimes you do need a 4-wheel drive out west, but we all think we need them in the middle of town. And my partner is a 4-wheel drive enthusiast. But anyway, so when you're going west, then there is a vehicle, maybe hopefully it's an electric vehicle that can go and do those things. But actually then maybe you can have, you know, for the closer ones, you'd have maybe push bike, and then you'd a cargo bike, and then maybe, you know, something else. But actually having a fleet, a multimodal fleet of delivery would be pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, I mean, with us, the thing about Todmorden is that the density is actually all around these radial spokes, the 3 valleys. So, you know, our sort of like long trips up to the tops, I think there's always one once a week where someone on the top of a hill wants something. But mainly, you know, Saturday, I had 10 bags of shopping that went up, you know, either side of one road that went sort of, 3 miles from the centre of Todmorden. So, you know, that kind of zigzagged round and then went back to the centre, did a couple of other drops, and then, you know, that was it. So the whole route was probably 12 miles in absolute total. So occasionally you'll get one that's a bit of an outlier, but you just have to take that, I think, with the kind of package, really. And that's about, you know, and that was maximally loaded as well, which is quite nice that we actually, you know, sometimes we'll one of the things that I found with the cargo bike is that you can kind of like do little loops and go back and pick up a second load and to manage the loading, but we're gradually getting better at kind of packing more and more things into it. I mean, the first time that I got it really that full, I kind of like, you take it off the stand and you go, whoa, this is kind of like, you've got a real sort of weight. But the thing about it is, as soon as you're moving forwards, it feels so light because you've got the battery assisting you. So it's a really amazing vehicle, to be honest. It enables all sorts of different approaches to doing things. I've been thinking about, you know, micro consolidation. I've been thinking about bike trailers. You can get electric assist bike trailers, so you could have like a little kind of almost like a consolidation pod on a bike trailer, and be riding that along with someone doing radial laps around you if you wanted to change the model slightly and carry maybe 20, 30 orders instead of the 10 that I had on Saturday. So there's all sorts of different ways of kind of configuring it, I reckon, for this slightly more diffuse area. Obviously, at some point, I'd really like to compare it with a proper, you know, a city last mile delivery service, because that would just be fascinating, really, in terms of drops per mile and all of that kind of density stuff and how long things take to make those deliveries. I keep asking our DHL drivers how many drops they do a day. They do a lot. They do hundreds, you know, about, I think in normal times, a DHL driver in our neighbourhood will do 80 drops in a day. And then they're doing, you know, time and a half that at the moment because of the crisis. So we're not doing that kind of amount of deliveries, that's for sure. But then again, we're doing them entirely in a different sort of environment.
Yeah, so interesting. And I think like it really shows that the shift that can happen really quickly when we need to. Because, you know, we talk a lot about in transport, you know, obviously there's behaviour change. And obviously this is, you know, that delivery service, but people still, there's the behaviour change of people then having to access that or whatever. And they've kind of had to. So, but then that gets ingrained in, this is easy, I can do this. And obviously it's free at the moment, so it's a little bit of a no-brainer. But yeah, then how you can build that into your routine moving forward will be really, really interesting to see. And yeah, I'm really keen to see some of the data and compare those comparisons as well.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is how a cargo bike delivery service compares to a van-based delivery service, and wondering what how speed limits would make a difference, because if you're in a 20 mile an hour zone, then your van and your cargo bike basically travel at the same speed. It's only outside of those sorts of zones that you have where the van has an advantage. So I'm kind of interested in, particularly city, urban areas where you've got these low speeds, how a cargo bike compares in terms of actual delivery speed, and because of the parking advantage if you're on a cargo bike, I found, and also the kind of narrow lanes and being able to use cycling infrastructure where you have it. So there's kind of like, there's also business adaptations that could be happening as well. I know that in central London and central Manchester, then cargo bikes are being used there's a really good business case for it. It's just looking at ensuring that we actually promote that and enable that as we come out of lockdown, that the cycling infrastructure remains. So we've got not in Calderdale, but there are pop-up cycle lanes arriving all over the country, which is great. And then also, trying to ensure that the speed limits are adhered to as well, which I don't know if you're having this, but the emptier roads are sometimes allowing people who would otherwise have been law-abiding just because of congestion to really put their foot down, and that's kind of unacceptable. It's a minority, because mostly the roads are really nice to ride on, but when you get those, it's kind of like, what's going on? So yeah, there's all sorts of behaviour. Well, I suppose there's legislation and enforcement that could really help reinforce that behaviour change.
All weather, how are they? Well, obviously you haven't had to test it in, say, snow or something like that. How did you deal with different weather?
So at the moment we've had hot weather, which is unusual in the UK. So we've been ice blanketing the food just to kind of with a reflective chilled blanket, just to make sure that shopping doesn't warm up too much. I mean, everything is delivered within 2 hours. So it's kind of, it's not beyond, it's kind of not outside the compass of a normal shopping trip. So, and then rain, we're very good at rain in Yorkshire. So we have waterproof cover. We have everyone who rides in the neighbourhood knows that you have to have waterproof trousers and gloves. It's clothing the riders, but because we're a volunteer force of people who are fairly keen on riding anyway, we have all of that kind of gear. Although one of my riders managed to get a real bum deal the other day and ended up wringing his gloves out when he delivered the bike back to the yard. So yeah, that's always going to be a bit of an issue. The thing about the electric bike is it's quite interesting because it takes some of the strain, so you're not working as hard. You can actually wear quite heavy waterproofs, whereas if you were just riding under your own steam, you get very hot if you're going uphill, and so waterproofs become quite kind of unpleasant and restrictive. Whereas you can kind of you can play around with the power that the assistance that the electric motor gives you, so that you don't have to work as hard if you feel like you're getting a bit steamy.
Yeah, I remember going snowboarding in Canada once, and it's my first time snowboarding, and so I had like heaps of clothes on because it was snow, right? It's going to be really cold.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so hot. It was like the worst. I was like trying to take, and of course I'm on the mountain, so you don't have anywhere to put your clothes, so you can't take them off. So I was just like melting, which I was like, this is ridiculous. It's snowing, and I'm trying to like take the scarf off and shove it in pockets and.
Yes. Snowing, but there's a nuclear reaction happening in my body. Yes, we're familiar with this experience. But yeah, because you don't have to work so hard on the bike, then you can kind of modulate that more easily. And it's quite a comfy ride. Although I have to say that if you do a couple of shifts, I did one run on Friday night just because it was the last one. I didn't want to ask anyone else to do it. And then I did another run on Saturday, and 2 days running, and you can feel it in your legs. And I've done a lot of mountain biking and I've ridden many, many miles. So it's interesting because you don't feel like you're working that hard on it because of presumably the assistance, but actually you are. So yeah, I think that whole thing about electric bikes will help you get fit is completely true.
So interesting. Well, we've been talking for quite a while. It's been so great to chat with you. I actually just want to ask a quick question around, your normal business. How has that changed? What you used to do? Are you still doing the same?
So Yeah, I'm still, I think, like everyone, I've lost some work out from, one of my commercial customers just is in a bit of a crisis. And in fact, 2 of them just with a lot of staff furloughed and things like that. So some of my work has disappeared, for sure. But I'm still getting inquiries, which is good. So yeah, it's kind of balancing the cargo bike. The cargo bike is such a nice, positive thing to do that it's kind of made up for the sort of disappointment of, and you think, well, I'm a freelancer, I'm self-employed. You kind of know that sometimes things can be a bit rocky. So I've kind of braced for that. Doing the cargo bike keeps me kind of cheery, which is good. And it also means that as we reach new normal, I've got some data that I'd never imagined that I could personally have collected. So I've done the valuations for other projects, but evaluating your own project as you go along is brilliant and really good fun. So yeah, I mean, it's changed. I'm working from home mainly. I usually have an office about 5 miles away just because that gets me out of the house. And working from home is kind of, you have to try and, remember to do your exercise so that you have done a kind of pseudo commute, because that helps clear your mind, I find. The dog's a constant companion. That's another, change. But yeah, it's kind of, I just feel like things like this happen and there's no point really looking back too much. It's more about kind of like, how do we adapt? How do we change? How do we use the things that we know to make something that is actually going to be better than what we came out of, rather than pick. I think my worry was that we would end up with the worst elements of the previous transport system rather than the best. So everything that I can do to try and point it in the right direction, I'm absolutely prepared to do.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours. I just want to touch on one point around looking at your own project. So I'm just about to do some data visualization for my company, and because I've been doing these subjects at uni, and yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to diving into my own data and then being able to. And I mean, it's kind of like social media data and looking at our engagement rates and stuff like that. But then actually playing around and doing some visualizations that hopefully will be quite powerful, and then just playing. And so it's something, I like the idea of it being cheery, it's like, oh, this is fun because it really affects me and we can learn things and do all those things. That's quite not a big deal or anything like that, but then actually taking some of those ideas and thoughts and learnings from doing that to then some real kind of meaty data and the stuff that you've been able to collect has been amazing. And then having a think about those other things that we might be able to collect in the future as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's cool.
Well, it's been so great to chat with you. Thank you for coming on to the podcast, and thanks for sharing. I've really enjoyed hearing about what you've been up to. It's really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to your data analysis as well. So I'll keep following you on LinkedIn, and if you need any visualization volunteers, let me know. I might be able to do some fun stuff. I've been playing around with Tableau lately, so it's been fun.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and I'll follow you on LinkedIn because I'm sure it will be there as well. So
thank you very much for listening to me.
No worries. I really enjoyed it. We'll talk soon.
Brilliant.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.